Spittle from Corporal Marcus Hale's mouth splattered across the deep-lined face of Harold Harry Thompson as the instructor roared, veins bulging in his neck under the scorching sun of Coronado, California. At 72, Harry, a wiry old man with a shock of unruly white hair, looked impossibly small compared to Hale's muscular frame. Around the training yard of the Naval Special Warfare Center, young Navy SEAL recruits stood in silence, watching Hale unleash his daily fury on the veteran who had dared to step into this hell on earth. "This isn't the chess club at the retirement home, old man," Hale barked, his words cutting through the salty air of Silver Strand Beach like a blade. The blazing sun beat down on the golden sand, turning the training ground into a pressure cooker of tension and contempt, where a devastating secret about Harry was about to turn everything upside down. Day 14 of basic training in Coronado, and Harold Harry Thompson had become Corporal Marcus Hale's favorite prey. Hale loomed in front of him, his shadow stretching long over the golden sand, his face carved with open contempt. "Stand up straight, old man," Hale growled, his voice dry and abrasive, like beach sand lodged in his throat. His cold, sharp eyes swept over the wiry frame, the slightly stooped shoulders, and the frayed edges of the training pants. 40 other recruits stood in a ring around them, silent as stone. A few exchanged glances, unable to hide their relief that today, they weren't the target. Some even smirked faintly, finding a cruel kind of comfort in watching an old man become the punching bag for an instructor's wrath. Harry stood there, eyes fixed on the ocean, neither answering nor defending himself. Hot sand pressed into the seams of his boots, sweat traced slow paths down his temples, yet there was something in his posture that refused to bend. "You think you belong here?" Hale stepped closer, his combat boots leaving deep imprints in the sand. "Look at you. A stiff breeze could knock you flat." The familiar answer flashed through Harry's mind on reflex, the one drilled into every service member over decades of training: to serve my country. But he didn't speak it. He only tilted his head slightly, as if the insult wasn't worth the breath it would take to respond. The blazing sun over Silver Strand Beach glinted off Hale's dark sunglasses. He smirked. "Serve your country? You'll be lucky if you get to serve coffee to these young men." A few scattered laughs broke out in the ranks, quickly dying when Hale's gaze swept over them. The old man remained there, unmoving, like a weathered marker that had stood through the tempests of many sailors' lifetimes. After Hale's final order, Harry was assigned a support task, scrubbing the locker room floor with a toothbrush. In the sharp scent of chlorine and damp socks, he knelt, each stroke slow and steady, as if long accustomed to such demeaning chores. No complaints, no signs of strain. Outside the barracks, the sea still pounded the shore, rhythmic as the breath of a giant. Across the bay stood the small seaside home in La Jolla, where Harry lived alone. At night, he sat in an old wooden chair, a military history book in hand, eyes fixed on the horizon. No one knew how many times he had sat like that, waiting for a ship that would never come in. To most people here, Harry was nothing more than a lonely old man, another outdated file in the VA system. But the real reason he had stepped into Coronado's hell at 72 and endured every humiliation Marcus Hale could throw at him was something no one in this platoon could have imagined. The question was, when that secret came to light, would they still dare to laugh?
Welcome to Veteran Life Stories, where real sacrifice meets unforgettable storytelling. Subscribe and keep their courage alive.
Day 15 began beneath a sky blazing blue, the surface of the Silver Strand shimmering with streaks of silver, and the shrill blare of training whistles blasting down from loudspeakers mounted on steel poles. Harry stood at the edge of the training field, his hands resting lightly on the waistband of his trousers, as if to steady the legs that had marched through far too many years of service. The order to run the obstacle course rang out, and Marcus Hale, wearing a smile laced with something unkind, turned toward him. "You'll run alone. Time limit cut in half. If you get tired, Just wave so I can call an ambulance from Balboa, he drawled, his voice dripping with mockery, as though offering some prized privilege. The rest of the platoon let their shoulders ease at least this morning. Hale's attention had picked someone else to torment. The starting whistle split the air. Harry began with slow steps, the sand swallowing his worn shoes as though trying to pull him under. But then, something difficult to explain happened. His breathing shifted deep, steady like it had locked into rhythm with the crashing waves. He wasn't rushing, nor was he struggling. Instead, his movements carried an uncanny economy of effort, each step sliding through the mud pit without a slip, as though he had done this not once, but thousands of times before. A young recruit murmured, "He's done this before." But no one spoke up. In the disciplined silence of Bud's, sometimes quiet was the only way to admit the truth. From her observation point, Petty Officer Andrea Klein shaded her eyes against the glare. When Harry hauled himself over the rope wall, his sweat-soaked training shirt clung to him, revealing a long scar running down his right ribcage. Klein knew at once this wasn't from some minor accident or a civilian surgery. The mark was clean, deep, with a faint twist, something her experience told her only a bullet could leave behind. During the break, while others gulped water or adjusted laces, Klein walked over. Her voice was soft but sure. "Where did you serve, sir?" Harry smiled faintly, as though the question was older than his boots. "Just a regular sailor, Petty Officer Klein. Vietnam, and a few other places." The answer was brief, polite, but his gaze drifted toward the horizon, to a place holding memories that had never been entered into any official report. That night, Hale handed out more duties, scrubbing the deck of the mock-up ship with a toothbrush under the cold glare of the training lights. A task anyone else would have taken as punishment, Harry performed with the precision of a man following a checklist he'd known by heart for decades. No sighs, no wasted movements, only the quiet focus of someone who'd spent a lifetime in places where mistakes didn't just cost points, they cost lives. Still unsettled, Klein headed to the VA Records archive during her lunch break the next day. She searched for Harold Thompson, expecting at least the basics unit, service dates, deployments. But what she found was only a few vague lines. United States Navy, Special Service. No mission notes, no list of commendations, only a void, as though someone had deliberately blacked out the rest. When night fell over Coronado, the sounds of surf and wind-shifting sand formed the backdrop to her restless thoughts. To Klein, a scar could tell an entire story. An empty space in a file could weigh more than any written line. And now, Harry, the old man mocked each morning, had become a puzzle she wanted to solve. But would the truth be as simple as opening a folder? Or would it unravel into a chain of secrets the entire Coronado Center wasn't prepared to face? Comment 1 if you're curious to hear the rest of the story. The water in Coronado's training pool that morning was so clear you could see every white tile strip along the bottom, yet the atmosphere was so heavy it felt like it could be sliced with a knife. The treading water test, one of the most infamous parts of BUD, always wound recruits as tight as piano wire. With a 10-pound weight belt cinched around the waist and a wetsuit soaked through, every kick had to be precise, every breath calculated. 1 minute of misjudgment could mean being yanked to the deck and often sent home for good. Marcus Hale stood at the pool's edge, scanning for his lucky candidate for a bit of personal entertainment. A thin smile crept across his face when his gaze settled on Harry. Standing beside him was Rodriguez, the young Texan who feared the water so much his face paled at the mere sight of a pool. Dream team, Hale thought before ordering them to pair up on the spot. Regulations required pairing recruits of comparable strength to ensure safety, but Hale quietly buckled an extra weight onto Harry's belt. No explanation, just a half-mocking, half-threatening remark. "Hope you swim better than you scrub floors." Rodriguez swallowed hard, while Klein, watching from a distance, frowned and stepped forward to object. Hale ignored her. To heighten the challenge, he opened the valve to let the water rise faster than usual. When the starting whistle shrilled, both men plunged into the frigid blue. Rodriguez flailed, his kicks wild, clawing at the water as though trying to climb it, burning through his air supply at a reckless pace. Harry, showing not the faintest trace of panic, slid closer, placed a firm yet steadying hand on his partner's shoulder, and signaled him to slow down. Sharing his regulator, he fed Rodriguez each breath in measured intervals, guiding him into a controlled, economical rhythm, each movement neat and deliberate, as if he'd rehearsed it his entire life. From the deck, Hale squinted, then, as if to push things further, pressed the button that cut off their oxygen. It was an abuse of authority that, if reported, could send him straight to a court-martial. Below the surface, Harry instantly sensed the change in pressure. Instead of reacting with fear, he removed his mask and looked directly toward the observation window in the pool wall right where Hale stood. His eyes held no outburst of anger, only a cold, measuring focus, as though calculating his next move. With a powerful kick born of years in combat, he propelled Rodriguez toward the emergency escape hatch at the pool's bottom. The younger man was on the verge of collapse, but Harry maneuvered him clear of danger. He followed close behind, rotating his body just in time to hook Rodriguez under the arms, surfacing with him at the lip of the auxiliary pool. They broke the water with heavy gasps, but not a single complaint. Klein immediately hit the emergency alarm, summoning the medics. Rodriguez was hauled out first, wrapped in towels for warmth, while Harry climbed up on his own, brushing aside the offered hands. Water dripped from his silver hair, forming shimmering rings on the sunlit concrete. Silence fell. The recruits who usually mocked him now just stared. The sight of the wiry old man standing tall after pulling a teammate from the edge of drowning, and doing it with almost chilling composure, left them motionless. Hale remained at the pool's edge, a flicker of unease in his eyes, quickly masked with a strained smile. Harry said nothing. He simply gave Hale one more glance, a brief look that carried the weight of a silent challenge. "I'm still here, and I'm not the man you think I am." A low murmur stirred among the ranks. Who is this old guy? Really? It was a question that wouldn't leave their minds until the truth came to light. The morning after that tense underwater training session, Harry was once again assigned a so-called support duty this time, mopping the deck of the mock-up ship before an unannounced inspection by the commanding officer. It was a task that seemed pointless, yet he carried it out with an almost unbelievable precision. Every speck of grime in the steel grooves scrubbed over and over until the metal gleamed as if freshly installed. The heavy thud of boots echoed down the passageway. Captain Elias Blackwood, a living legend of the SEALs, the man who had commanded special operations in Afghanistan, stepped in. He brought no aides, saying nothing at first, simply watching as a gaunt older man bent low, brush in hand, as if performing some sacred act of military discipline. When Harry leaned to reach the lower edge of a bulkhead, his worn training shirt slipped slightly, revealing a faded yet unmistakable trident tattoo. Light caught on the etched lines of the golden trident, the sacred emblem reserved only for those who had endured Bud S and completed special missions. Blackwood stopped in his tracks, his eyes sharpened as if catching the shadow of someone from a distant memory. "Mr. Thompson," his voice slower now, no longer the clipped tone of command. "SEAL Team 3's trident, isn't it?" Harry paused, straightened just enough, and gave a small nod. No explanation, no display of pride, only a quiet acknowledgement. But for Blackwood, it was enough to bring back the image of a man who had once served under his father in a covert South China Sea operation that only a handful had survived to tell about. The official inspection was all but forgotten. Blackwood signaled for Harry to follow him into the auxiliary command room. Dim light washed over their faces, one older, one in his prime, yet both spoke the silent language of men who had known war. Blackwood began, "You're not a regular volunteer. I'm guessing you're here under the Shadowcast program?" Harry leaned back in the chair, fingers interlaced. "That's right," he replied, his voice low but steady. "I was re-recruited at 50. After Vietnam, I thought I'd left it all behind. But when the system started rotting from the inside, I couldn't stand by." Blackwood was silent for a few moments, weighing every word. The Shadowcast program, a covert unit that embedded veterans into training classes to evaluate instructor misconduct, was known only to a select few. With his decades of experience and absolute discretion, Harry was the perfect operative for such a mission. He explained briefly. In recent months, he had deliberately played the part of the useless old man to draw attention and test the moral limits of those leading the recruits. Every incident of bullying, every humiliating chore, all of it, had been documented and sent back to the oversight team. "Not for revenge," Harry said, "but to protect the next generation from those who think power means the right to degrade." Blackwood nodded, silent respect in his eyes. "You know," he said, "my father used to tell me there are victories that will never be told, yet they save more lives than any medal ever could." Harry gave a faint, dismissive smile, as if praise was unnecessary. For him, quiet sacrifice was never about heroics. It was simply the right thing to do. Out in the hallway, footsteps receded. No one knew that inside that room, a piece of the mystery surrounding the old man of Coronado had just been revealed. But was that all? Or were there still layers of the past no one had touched? My friends, stay tuned for the next part 1 that will leave you in awe. And take a second to drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see people joining us from all over the world. News of that day's inspection didn't need an official report to spread. In Coronado, truly remarkable stories traveled faster than any radio signal, from the weight room to the mess hall, from the barracks all the way to the sands of Silver Strand Beach. Overnight, the skinny old man mopping the deck had turned into the mysterious old seal whispered about across the entire platoon. Rodriguez, who had once wanted nothing more than to keep as far away from Harry as possible, was the first to approach. He walked up to Harry early in the morning, while the older man was checking the mooring lines along the pier. There were no lengthy explanations, just a deep, deliberate bow of the head and a short sentence, "You saved me." I'm sorry." His voice trembled and Harry answered with a single nod, no extra words, as if forgiveness had already been waiting for him all along. Andrea Klein, who had suspected something from the start, now wore an expression that was equal parts relief and shame. She wrote a detailed report to Captain Blackwood, attaching every piece of evidence related to Hale's misconduct. Within hours, that report had traveled through secure channels all the way to the desk of Admiral Hargrove at Special Operations Command in Virginia. Hargrove, renowned for his zero-tolerance style, took only 15 minutes to read the file before issuing a decision. The order to relieve Marcus Hale of duty came immediately, citing a violation of Article 92 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, UCMJ, abuse of authority that endangered subordinates. The news hit the base like a thunderclap, not just for its speed, but because it was rare for a training petty officer to be removed this swiftly. That afternoon, the entire platoon was assembled. There were no smirks or chuckles when Harry walked in. Instead, one by one, each man stood at attention, eyes forward, and when Blackwood gave the signal, they raised their hands in a unified salute. It wasn't just a formality, it was recognition, an apology that words could never fully match. Some of the recruits, especially those from far-flung states like Florida and Texas, wrote handwritten letters to Harry. In them, they admitted they had been wrong to judge him by his appearance, called him the embodiment of a true SEAL, and thanked him for showing them the real meaning of discipline and brotherhood. One card jokingly read, "If a 72-year-old man can pass this test, we've officially run out of excuses to complain." Beyond Coronado, the story took on a life of its own. On veterans forums like the American Legion in Washington, D.C., a photo of Harry standing at the edge of the pool the moment he shoved Rodriguez out of danger was shared thousands of times. The comments didn't just praise him personally, they called for reform in the VA system to better honor and support forgotten veterans. Blackwood, a man of few words, said to Harry in a private meeting, "Your report will save many lives in the future." He didn't say thank you, because both men understood that in this world, true acknowledgement was shown through action, and the removal of Hale was action enough. The change in Coronado wasn't just the result of a disciplinary order. It was in the way the recruits began to see the thin old man not as a burden, but as a mirror, a living proof that the essence of a SEAL wasn't in age or physique, but in will and dignity. And in this atmosphere of newly restored respect, one question still lingered. Was this the final chapter of Harry's story in Coronado, or just the visible tip of a much deeper past? Harry's old pickup truck rolled out of the Coronado gate before dawn, its license plate coated in a thin film of dust from weeks of commuting between the base and La Jolla. The departure paperwork listed only family emergency, a reason so routine that no one asked further questions. Yet for those who had witnessed what he had done here, his absence left behind a void that was difficult to name. On the way home, he pulled over at Silver Strand. The beach was empty, save for the Pacific waves pounding against the golden shore as if trying to echo the rhythm of his youth. This was where it had all begun, the first morning of BUD.S, nearly half a century ago, when he had stood in formation, shivering with cold and nerves, yet never turning away. Now it was the same shoreline, but his hair had turned white, his shoulders narrower, and across his back the trident tattoo, its colors faded, was no longer hidden beneath a worn shirt. That emblem, once the target of jeers, now stood prominently in the official report sent straight to the Pentagon. Captain Blackwood's account did more than recount the pool incident. It recommended reforms to certain clauses in the SEAL training program to prevent abuses of authority like Hale's. The changes were quickly approved, and Harold Thompson's name was recorded as both a witness and a catalyst for change. A few weeks later at Coronado, Harry's old platoon, now led by Klein, held a small ceremony. Not a noisy parade, but a quiet moment before the center's wall of honor. A new brass plaque gleamed in the sunlight, etched with simple words, "Harold Thompson, SEAL Team 3, Integrity and Silence." The same recruits who had once mocked him now stood in formation, caps held to their chests, eyes steady and full of respect. In La Jolla, Harry received an envelope from Blackwood. Inside was a new trident pin, glinting in the soft afternoon light spilling through the window. He settled into the familiar wooden chair by the frame, the ocean stretching out before him, the salty wind carrying memories of years past into the room. His fingers traced the fine engraving on the metal. To anyone else, it might have been just a gift. But to Harry, it was proof that every scar, every silence, every moment of being underestimated had meaning. It was a sign that the past need not be buried, that resolve and loyalty do not fade with age. Outside, a few children ran along the shoreline, their laughter mingling with the sound of the surf. Harry smiled and leaned back slowly in his chair. He didn't need a stage or fireworks, only the knowledge that, in some way, he had helped protect the next generation. Those who would wear the trident on their chest, yet hopefully never endure the things he once had. This story is a reminder that in the vast machinery of the U.S. military, justice sometimes comes from its quietest figures. And perhaps, the person you once dismissed might just be the hero waiting for the right moment to step forward. Do we truly see all the Harrys who walk silently beside us each day? There are heroes who do not need to stand under the spotlight, who seek neither applause nor medals. They live in silence, doing what is right not to be remembered, but because the next generation deserves to be protected. The story of Harold Harry Thompson reminds us never to judge someone solely by appearance or age. Sometimes, the person you believe to be fragile carries a strength and courage powerful enough to change an entire system. If you are going through days when you are doubted or underestimated, remember that your true worth is not measured by what others can see, but by how steadfastly you hold to what you believe is right. Thank you for following this story. If it has touched your heart, please leave a comment, share your thoughts, or tell us about a Harry you have met in your life. Don't forget to share this video so the stories of silent heroes can be heard far and wide. And if you want to hear more inspiring stories like this, hit that follow button because the best is yet to come.
That tattoo doesn't exist in any military records, but I've seen it, on the body of a missing officer. Those were the words a former Marine whispered when he spotted Gideon Cole's left shoulder amid the smoke and flames of the Pittsburgh steel mill. An explosion, a life-saving act, and the faint ink reading I-9 to 86 awakened a secret buried for nearly 4 decades. Who is Gideon? Why was he forced to live as a nobody? And what could make the very system that once erased his name now erect a statue in front of the entire nation? All right, my dear viewers, get ready for a tale that will leave you speechless. Take a second to like the video and subscribe, and drop a comment below to let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always thrilling to see people joining us from all corners of the globe. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, February. A biting wind whips through the rusted smokestacks, sweeping into every crack in the steel walls, as if intent on dislodging old memories. The once mighty steel city now lies cloaked in ash gray, and at its heart stands Carson Mill's aging plant kept alive more by human grit than by machines. At 4:30 a.m., while most of Pittsburgh still slumbered, Gideon Cole was already at the main gate. No warning siren, no welcoming committee, not a word of greeting. He swiped his badge and stepped inside like a time-worn fixture of the building, silent, sturdy, unnoticed, until he was missing. At Carson Mills, they called him Old Timer. No one knew his real name, and no one asked. To the younger workers, he was a curiosity, the first to arrive, the last to leave, never on social media, never joining anyone for lunch. Always seated in a corner with his own lunch pail and a battered black notebook. "Watch out's about to start lecturing," one young engineer whispered when he passed by. "Bet he was talking to that old machine last night." Another scoffed. Gideon heard it all, but did not flinch. Instead, he walked slowly toward the press area where he had worked for nearly 10 years, a rare zone, still semi-manual for safety reasons. A bitter irony, the least modern place was also the most dangerous. His hands were calloused and oak-hard, each finger scarred and cracked by heat, by time, and by forgotten deeds. He had once been the finest welder in a special military unit, but no one here knew. They only saw a quiet old man, gazing into the distance as if living in another era. That morning, inspecting press number 7. Gideon paused for a long moment. He laid a hand gently on the shaft and pressed his ear against the steel casing. A faint sound, a crack, uneven like metal under unbearable strain. He straightened and sought out the control engineer. "If I were you, I'd stop the press and inspect the compression shaft." "There's a hairline fracture in the core," he said in a low, steady tone. The young engineer looked at him as one would an antique clock. "Thanks, Mr. Cole. But the software didn't flag anything. Our sensor system is far more advanced than your instincts." Gideon said nothing more and did not turn away. He merely looked into the young man's eyes, then gave a slight nod. He returned to his bench, pulled his notebook from his jacket pocket, and scribbled something in silence. The fluorescent light above cast a pale halo on his silver hair, as though he were set apart from the rest of the mill. A gust of wind rattled the door seam, bringing the scent of smoke, damp metal, and something that smelled remarkably like memory. Gideon looked up at the ceiling, where girders intersected like the bars of a time prison. He had seen this scene before, in a faraway place, a cold bunker, an ammunition cache, a decision no one dared claim responsibility for, and a loss never permitted to be named. No one at Carson Mills knew that the gaze of this man had once witnessed war closer than any of them, that he did not fear broken machinery, but the arrogance that repeats itself, a flaw that had buried his comrades and his own name beneath the dust of history. Gideon Cole had lived in silence for far too long. But that day, he began to hear a familiar warning, the steel tremble of impending danger. And deep inside, he knew something was repeating. And this time, no one would be laughing. Friday, light sleet pattered against the rusted tin roof of Carson Mills, leaving blurred streaks like memories still damp. Pittsburgh's sky was an unbroken leaden gray, not a single shaft of light reflected on the dusty window panes, much like the look in Gideon Cole's eyes that morning. He stood outside the engineering supervisor's office, hands sodden with icy snow, trembling slightly from the cold. In his hand was a hand-drawn schematic on yellowed paper, its edges neatly folded as if preserved in a military rucksack. Not a software-generated diagram, not a coded digital report, just an A4 sheet sketched in pencil, lines as sharp and precise as a plasma cut. Gideon knocked on the door, no answer. Pop music leaked through the supervisor's headphones, making the room feel even more distant. Finally, when Gideon entered, the young manager removed one earbud, swiveling in his chair with his hand still on the mouse. "Back again, Mr. Cole?" Gideon said nothing for a few seconds. He laid the drawing on the desk and gently pointed to the compression shaft detail marked in red. "I think you should look at this. It's the chain reaction if the compression shaft on press number 7 fails. It won't stop at one machine. The west line goes into cascade within 2 minutes. If pressure spikes, the whole workshop wing could collapse in under 5. The manager arched an eyebrow as though hearing some ancient legend. "You drew this with pencil?" He lifted the paper like an antique fax. "Really? It's the 21st century, Grandpa. We've got predictive software, AI, sensors, pressure alarms. And this is what you bring? Charcoal art?" He half smirked and returned the sheet to the desk without a second glance. Gideon did not show anger or surprise. He simply stood there, his hand brushing the drawing once, then withdrew it like placing flowers on a grave, full of respect, yet hopeless. "Just a warning," he said, voice steady but with a catch in his throat. The manager turned back to his screen. "No thanks. No further questions." Gideon turned and walked down the corridor. The sleet continued to fall, each flake melting on his shoulder, blending into the gray fabric as if the weather itself kept its silence with him. That evening, in the garage behind his small timber house on the outskirts of Wilkinsburg, Gideon opened the wooden cabinet beneath his workbench. His hands ran over each screwery, one bearing the mark of repairs he had done alone, without help. From the bottom shelf, he retrieved a small, old wooden box, sealed with a length of canvas webbing. He carefully untied the knot, as though unsealing a time capsule. Under the yellow garage light, he revealed 3 items: a worn brown leather notebook, its corners frayed, a military dog tag, the engraving faded, and a wartime photograph, its edges slightly creased. In the photo stood 5 men side by side in a forest clearing, rifles slung over their shoulders, faces streaked with grime and eyes hardened. All stared at the camera except one, Gideon. On the back he had written, "Iron Forge, 1986, never spoken of again." His finger traced those pencil letters, now blurred by time. Gideon sat on a wooden stool and opened the leather notebook. The first page held another hand-drawn diagram, a tactical map, marked with codes, arrows, and coordinates. But he did not turn the page. He closed his eyes. In his mind echoed an explosion, not at Carson Mills, but in a border warehouse where he had ordered a detonation at the last moment because the sensors lagged, where 3 of the 4 men in that photo never returned. His vow of silence then was not for honor but to save the lives of the survivors. Because the government had ordered their names erased from every record, so the operation would never exist. And he had kept that vow, 37 years. But now, standing in a centuries-old mill on the brink of failure, not from enemy fire but from human arrogance, Gideon knew. Certain truths, if left unspoken, will repeat themselves. Only this time, he wasn't sure who would survive to tell the tale. Monday morning began like any other, cold, silent, and seemingly endless. The clock read 6:18, Droplets melting from last night's snow fell onto the steel gutters, echoing like a countdown. Carson Mills stirred to the clatter of engines, the grind of rolling shutters, and the harsh glow of industrial lights splashing across oil-stained concrete floors. Gideon Cole was already on site. As always, he spoke no words, drank no coffee, exchanged no pleasantries, only his measured footsteps, carrying the cold precision of a man who had survived by caution. But that morning, something in the air made him pause as he passed press number 7. There was a strange sound, indistinct like metal groaning under stress. Gideon narrowed his eyes. That same unbearable tension, that muffled creak he'd heard before. In an underground bunker, when a detonator delayed, just before disaster. 6:20 a.m. An explosion is not a sound, it is a shockwave. Dust and shards of metal blasted outward like artillery, tearing through the air and slamming into every surface. Press number 7 erupted, breaching its partition, and fire roared up like a blast furnace. Shouts rang out. Some workers scrambled away, others froze in place. The alarm siren belatedly wailed a few seconds later. But amid the chaos, Gideon did not hesitate. Without orders, he plunged into the smoke as though it were his element. His work coat hood drawn low, he navigated swiftly through blazing I-beams and cracked concrete. Secondary blasts echoed, pressure waves hurling everyone back except him. A young operator lay trapped beneath a fallen frame, his gas mask knocked off, coughing amid the black smoke. Gideon said nothing. He placed his coat over the man's face, then used his shoulder to lever the steel just enough to pull him free. No words, no pause. They tumbled out into a safer zone. The operator coughed violently as Gideon, his coat now singed, stood by, one sleeve torn away by the heat, revealing his shoulder. There, against sun-darkened skin and old scars, was a tattoo in military block letters, I-9 to 86. Faded and worn, but unmistakable to any service member that was no random number. It was a campaign code. I-9, Special Action Unit. 86, the year. At the sight of it, a hush fell over the onlookers, not because of the flames, but because of what lay behind them. In a corner by the security door, a man in his 70s stood frozen. Marcus Bella, retired Marine who had served in Okinawa and later trained U.S. Special Forces technical teams, stared at the tattoo, his face paling. "It can't be," he whispered, stepping forward, hand trembling. "Iron Forge? I thought that entire unit was lost." Gideon rose, eyes still on the firefight being extinguished. He offered neither denial nor confirmation, but the way he stood silent, breathing evenly, eyes reflecting only endurance, spoke volumes. Marcus bowed his head, in silence, no explanation needed. Those who knew the truth recognized one another by a single mark. The fire was finally quelled. The chief engineer was evacuated. Fire crews arrived too late. And everyone at Carson Mills that day, for the first time, looked at Gideon not as old-timer, but at the tattoo and behind it, at a void no system could measure, a campaign erased, a man forgotten. But from that moment on, the truth began to crack the steel shell, and the name Gideon Cole was no longer just a shadow in the mill. He had stepped out of silence by the very act that required no words. Dear viewers, please relax, or grab a glass of water, then stay tuned for the rest of the story. More surprises await. Comment 1 if you're enjoying this tale, so we know you're still with us. Marcus Bell did not immediately step forward. He stood off to the side, beyond the cluster of onlookers still murmuring about the explosion, quietly staring at the scorch-marked back of Gideon. That tattoo, it could not be coincidence. I-9 to 86. He had seen it before, glimpsed in a top-secret report, like a ghost in records of the non-existent. His heart pounded, but his feet moved slowly. As he approached, he no longer saw the old welder who'd passed the guard shack these past months. Before him stood a fragment of history he had long believed buried. "You're Cole, aren't you?" His voice was hoarse and hesitant, as if afraid to misname something sacred. "Gideon Cole? Unit 4? Gideon did not look at Marcus. He was still kneeling beside the young operator. his scarred hand pressing a dressing to the man's burned leg. But at the mention of Unit 4, his shoulder gave a faint tremor. Marcus continued, I-9 is the Special Action Group, 86 is the year. The campaign codename, Iron Forge. A hush fell between them, broken only by distant sirens. Gideon rose slowly, brushing his hands on his pants, then looked up at Marcus. In his gray eyes was no surprise. No fear. Only acceptance, as if he knew this day would come, only not the hour. I remember your name, Marcus said quietly. Someone in my unit spoke of you, on our last night at the border. He said, there's a welder who never abandons his post. If anyone survives, it's because of him. Gideon nodded. A simple gesture, yet it carried the weight of a life lived among unspoken truths. He drew from his jacket pocket a small Objecta brown leather notebook whose corners were dog-eared. His hand shook slightly as he raised it, not from the burn, but from the memory stirring within. We were ordered to not exist, he said, in a steady, measured tone. Our names, our records, our deeds, all erased. The survivor stole to keep silent, as if we'd never been there. He gazed down at the notebook as though facing an old friend. But I could not forget. I tried. I tried to live like a civilian, to sleep without waking in a start, to breathe welding smoke without recalling gunpowder, but it was impossible to forget. Gideon's eyes drifted as he spoke. He was no longer at Carson Mills. He was back at that far-off place, a cold Eastern European forest, an enemy cache buried beneath the earth. The faint golden glow in his night vision goggle lensa sand, the scent of burned bodies over a dead radio crackle. Our team was trapped when the exit collapsed. We triggered the charge from inside 3, did not make it out. I was the one who placed the final block. And I set the failsafe so the enemy believed bombs still remained. Marcus stood silent. He asked no follow-up. Some confessions need no confirmation. They carry a truth that no paper can convey. The ache of sacrifice. Gideon gripped the notebook, then offered it to Marcus. The first pages are their names, in my own hand, because I would not let their names vanish again. Marcus received it with both hands, handling it as though it were a precious artifact. He gave a solemn nod. Keeping it is the easy part, Gideon murmured, his gaze fixed on the smoky distance. But living with it, that's the hardest burden. No one spoke further. Yet in that silence, recognition passed between them, not by medals nor speeches, but by two veterans meeting eye to eye. One the bearer of memory, the other its witness. And that tattoo once hidden beneath a work jacket had become the living cipher of a past no system could continue to conceal. A past no longer destined to remain in the shadows. Marcus Bell couldn't sleep that night. He sat in the guard shack, fingers resting on the brown leather notebook Gideon had given him. The midnight wind rattled the thin window slats, mingling with the rare patrol cars rolling past the mill. Under the dim glow of the desk lamp, he read each page. The handwriting was bold, slanted to the right, penciled without a tremor. The first page listed names, ages, unit codes not of Gideon, but of those who never returned. The next was a campaign map, arrows, symbols, coordinates. Then came the entry soon adorned, objective, painful exactly as a soldier would recall. Around 3 a.m., he photographed several pages, the operational overview, the weapons cache map, and Gideon's field journal written after returning. He sent the images to his daughter, Naomi Bella, freelance YouTube journalist, specializing in military history investigations. Less than 12 hours later, Naomi published a video titled, The Mysterious Tattoo of the Rescuer Welder. The video opened with footage of Carson Mills engulfed in smoke and flames, then cut to the charred I-9-86 tattoo on Gideon's left shoulder. Naomi's calm, measured voice asked, "Why does a 63-year-old welder in Pittsburgh bear the secret code of an unacknowledged military operation?" She continued, "And why, after saving a life, did he refuse all recognition, saying only, 'I just want everyone to get home safely'?" The clip reached 2 million views in 48 hours. Comments flooded in like a storm surge. Hundreds of veterans recognized the journal's symbols, terminology, and operational codes. A user named Rick Havoc 47 wrote, "I was in Berlin in September '86. I heard U.S. special operators mention Forge during a continuous radio blackout. This is real." A retired intelligence officer emailed Naomi. Iron Forge existed. I saw the operation map. The orders were signed by a senior commander, later removed for excessive classification. I remember one name erased: Cole. Now I know why. Mainstream media could not ignore it. The Pittsburgh Gazette ran a front-page story, "The Welder and the Government Secret, Who is Gideon Cole?" Within 3 days, Gideon's name graced the front pages of local papers and exploded across veterans' forums. Former special operators, technicians, Interpreter Saul came forward to verify details from the journal. Some even visited Carson Mills, not to protest, but to stand at a distance and look at the steelworks where the Oath Keeper had welded each seam in silence for nearly 2 decades. The mill launched an internal inquiry. Unlike past incidents, this time there was no cover-up. A closed meeting took place, and though no press release was issued, an internal memo circulated. Employees deserve to know with whom they work. And when someone has held an entire front line together to survive, we no longer call him old-timer. Gideon was invited to speak at the union meeting that weekend. A makeshift podium was set up in the mill lobby, still scented with smoke. Nearly every worker attended. Some wore T-shirts printed with the I 9 to 86 emblem, the same pride they reserved for their favorite sports teams. Gideon took the podium, no notebook, no notes. The overhead lights revealed every wrinkle and scar, neither hidden nor embellished. He spoke just one sentence, no more, no less. "I just want everyone to get home safely, no matter who I am." The hall fell silent, then someone applauded, then another, and soon the entire mill erupted, not for the speech, but for what had been missing too long. A mirror held up by action, not by promises. Gideon Cole's story was no longer a secret. It became a symbol that heroes do not walk red carpets, but through fire, not by business cards, but by calloused hands and a faded tattoo. And it all began because one man refused to let the truth rust away once more. 2 weeks after the explosion, Pittsburgh's sky still wore the stagnant gray of an unarrived spring. But that day on the grounds of Carson Mills, a very different atmosphere blazed to life. The main gate opened early. A silent procession flowed inward. Workers in spotless safety gear, veteran soldiers wearing old service pins on their left chests, even high school students following teachers' instructions. Today we will witness a lesson never found in textbooks. There were no fluttering flags, no red banners, only a small courtyard beside the old mill, where a makeshift wooden podium stood and, beside it, a cloth-covered frame awaiting its unveiling. Gideon arrived early, as always, but today he carried no lunch pail and wore no faded work coat. His borrowed suit hung a bit loosely, clearly not tailored, but his collar was crisply pressed, and his shoes, though well worn, had been polished to reflect the morning light. He stood at the edge of the crowd, not pushing to the front. His gaze took in the courtyard as one might watch a memory come alive. No one called him old-timer anymore. They addressed him by name, greeted him with firm handshakes and respectful nods. Colonel Marcus Thorne opened the ceremony. He stepped onto the podium holding a small velvet-lined box and spoke with a slight tremor of emotion. "There are medals awarded at the right time, there are medals awarded at the wrong time, and there are medals never awarded because the truth was hidden." He paused, then looked directly at Gideon. "Today, the Department of Defense formally acknowledges the existence of Operation Iron Forge and the command role of Mr. Gideon Cole, who led the team that destroyed an illicit weapons stockpile on the Eastern European border in 1986. The mission was an absolute success. But for security reasons, all records were destroyed, and the identities of the participants went unrecognized. Marcus opened the box. Inside lay a replica Medal of Honor, not gleaming like most, but forged in steel according to the original 1986 design, the same metal Gideon had worked with all his life. He stepped forward to Gideon's side to gentle applause, steady, rather than frenzied, each clap a belated atonement from a community that had long overlooked him. Marcus placed the box in Gideon's hands, 37 years late, but never too late to say thank you. Gideon did not open the box. He held it in both hands and raised his eyes to the crowd. His gaze was not wet with tears, but something shone, not sunlight, but the relief of a burden finally lifted. "I never imagined I'd hold this again," he said in a voice as deep as a welding arc. "And honestly, I don't need it, but if this reminds anyone of those who never came home, then I will keep it for them." No one applauded after that. Not for lack of feeling, but because no one wanted to shatter that precious silence. The ceremony ended as the cloth was pulled away. Beneath stood a bronze bust of Gideon Colis, face neither smoothed nor idealized. Every wrinkle, every line, preserved exactly as he was, a real man. His pose, one hand clutching a welding helmet to his chest, his eyes cast into the distance and not searching for anything, but standing guard over a vow he swore would never be repeated. On the stone plinth beneath, one simple inscription: Silent Oath Keeper, Iron Forge, 1986. Gideon did not pose for photos with the statue. He did not take a selfie or go live on camera. After the crowd dispersed, he paused before the memorial, quietly placed his hand on the inscription and then turned and walked away. But that day, his steps were lighter, no longer weighed down, no longer silenced by obligation, but choosing silences he always had, needing no one's attention, only doing what was right. There are heroes who need no applause. They live among Usain factories, auto shops, or the corner gas station carrying memories of a world they once sacrificed to protect. Yet it is precisely that silence which speaks most powerfully, that honor lies not in medals, but in what we uphold quietly. The story of Gideon Cole is not merely about war or belated recognition. It is a reminder that each of us carries a piece of the past perhaps forgotten, but never lost. And sometimes, listening to an old tale can heal an entire generation. Thank you for watching to the end. If this story has touched you, please hit like, subscribe, and leave a comment below where you're watching from, and who in your life deserves to be remembered as a silent hero. Share this video with a veteran, because perhaps today is the day they finally get heard.